KU went into this not knowing if they had a wide receiver one, right? If you were to say, hey, who on the roster would be this guy if the season started immediately after the last season ended, it would be Doug Emelian. And Doug Emelian obviously hasn't played that role to that point. I think Emmanuel Henderson has number one wide receiver potential when you look at the fact that he was a really highly recruited running back, was the number 2 running back in the country. And so he does give you some run after catch things. Hasn't played receiver for as long, had played wide receiver at Alabama though. But Nick, I think we mentioned this maybe last time we talked about the transfer portal. If you're good enough to be on the field and making catches in Alabama, Georgia, then you're a guy that maybe has some untapped potential.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Pay heed, all who enter. Beware of this podcast. That's right, this is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. We are back in a recap the transfer portal as it winded down for a little bit there with the dead period, but Kansas still in on a couple of guys that they're still looking to add. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about who they've got already on board and where we think Kansas sits heading into the spring as well. And as a reminder, there is a spring transfer portal as well. So if one thing goes another way and Kansas ends up maybe not getting some guys that they are interested in right now, there is another opportunity for KU in the spring window to add some players as well. So I would always keep that in the back of your mind as things continue to unfold in the transfer portal. So we're going to be talking about all of that coming up on today's show. Might get into a little bit of KU basketball later on as they're going to be taking on UCF later this weekend. Of course, if you are watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can drop a like on the video and also drop a comment to share your thoughts. We are very close to 500 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed over on our YouTube channel, head over there and do that and help us out there. You can also subscribe, of course, on the audio platform, anywhere you listen, anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, so on and so forth. Also, off the top here, we are recording this on Friday afternoon. You're probably listening to this over the weekend. Hopefully you are staying safe and warm if you are in the Kansas City area because there's a massive winter storm that is barreling towards us. So I'm speaking to future you. Hopefully you're safe as we record on Friday afternoon. Okay. Let's get into the transfer portal here with Kansas. They have officially now 18 commitments in the transfer portal. We had talked with Michael Swain on the show. You can go back and listen to that episode earlier, a couple weeks ago now. He had mentioned that he expected Kansas to get well over 20 players in the transfer portal. So got 18 right now. You figure Kansas might be looking to add probably a handful more guys, but for the most part, this is who KU's got out of the transfer portal in what was a massive couple of weeks for KU, considering how many players they lost in the transfer portal. We talked about Jalen Daniels coming back, but obviously needing some receivers to throw the ball to, which we'll get into a little bit later on in the show. But overall, you look at this transfer portal haul, Kevin, their highest rated transfer, if you would go by 24/7 Sports, is actually Keon Burnett, the tight end from Arizona, a high 3-star. Some of the other highlights, you got a guy like Emmanuel Henderson, a Tyler Mercer from North Texas, Cam Pickett, Joseph Sipp, a guy I'm really excited about. You added a kicker that was a Luke Rose, a semifinalist in Lath Margin that you hope works out. Lyric Rawls, also an 89 high 3-star transfer on 24/7 Sports. Joel Hurley, a guy we're both excited about. The return of Gage Keys. Who are the first couple of guys that jumped out to you in this transfer portal class, Kevin? And maybe just as we kind of sit here at the start of January overall, I mean, how do you think Kansas has done to this point?
Yeah, there's not necessarily a guy that jumps out where you're like, oh, this was, a 5-star get or a 4-star get. But they've done a great job covering a lot of different needs with guys who fit what they want to have those guys do. And I think, when you look at tight end, when you look at Deshaun Hanukkah coming back from that injury, you look at Keon Barnett as a guy that can really stretch the field at that tight end position a lot like Hanukkah can. And you look at the tight end position this year for KU, obviously, stretching the field from that position, it maybe wasn't as good as it had been in previous years. So that was something that I think could change moving forward based on that. My favorite guy in the portal, Nick, I think we mentioned this before, is probably Tyler Mercer, the interior offensive lineman from North Texas. He's a guy that looks like a plug and play starter after Bryce Foster leaves. Maybe good enough to win a guard spot this year. They have an open guard spot, of course, but even if he doesn't, being a guy that can provide depth this year and then sort of slide into that center position, I'm pretty excited about that one. I think there's a lot good to feel about there, where you feel like that guy could be sort of one of the foundational pieces of your offensive line moving forward. The other guy, one of the newer additions, I felt like the receiver position, they've attacked really well in terms of getting guys who do different things, right? Like Levi Wentz is a contested catch guy. Cam Pickett is a run after catch guy that you can throw the ball too short, can make something happen after he catches it. Bryson Canty, not as tall, but kind of fills that Quentin Skinner role in terms of being a bigger guy that can really run and get down the field. He's probably not going to be a 70 catch guy, but he is a guy that could average, 18, 20 yards a catch and really help your offense moving forward. The other guy at that position, though, Nick, I think KU went into this not knowing if they had a wide receiver one, right? If you were to say, hey, who on the roster would be this guy if the season started immediately after the last season ended, it would be Doug Emillion. And Doug Emillion obviously hasn't played that role to that point. I think Emmanuel Henderson has number one wide receiver potential when you look at the fact that he was a really highly recruited running back, was the number 2 running back in the country. And so he does give you some run after catch things. Hasn't played receiver for as long, had played wide receiver at Alabama though. But Nick, I think we mentioned this maybe last time we talked about the transfer portal. If you're good enough to be on the field and making catches in Alabama, Georgia, then you're a guy that maybe has some untapped potential. And so the fact that he had 4 catches this year doesn't really bother me that much. I think he's stepping into a spot where opportunities are going to be there for him to produce, and I think he's got the ability to do so. How about you? Like, who jumps out for you in this class?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the wide receiver position was one of significant need, right?
Yeah.
And Emmanuel Henderson seems like a high potential guy. We talked about Jaleel Hurley, another guy who was a former top 50 guy. I'm really excited about Joseph Sipp. KU is still in pursuit of more linebackers, by the way. And then we were just talking off air before we started recording the show, Kevin. People forget about Bengali Kamara, who is a very athletic, explosive type of athlete from South Carolina, right? And I think you look at both Bengali Kamara and Joseph Sipp, those are 2 guys that I'm almost anticipating could start game 1 for KU at the linebacker spot heading into next season, and they may be looking to add more guys to that room as well. So Kamara is a guy that was somebody who you added. He was your first commitment, I believe, right? All the way back in October.
Yeah.
And he's somebody that I think could be a real day one starter for KU, potentially at the linebacker position. I also really like Lyric Rawls. Talked about him. Here's a starter for Oklahoma State in 2022. Got hurt, but definitely has that capability. You look at the quarterback position, a guy like a DJ Graham, who's probably somebody a bit more reliable. Like Jaleel Hurley, I like the upside, but is he going to be right away? I don't know, maybe not. But I did want to circle back to the wide receiver position because to me, that obviously is probably the most important position in the portal at this point for KU.
Yeah.
And they did just add another addition recently over the last couple of days to that position group, which was Bryson Canty, a transfer out of Columbia. And Canty actually, Kevin, steps in and pretty much immediately becomes the most productive receiver that KU has out of this transfer portal class. Just when you look at his numbers, this past season at Columbia, you talked about him being an 18 to 20 yards per catch type of guy. He averaged 17.7 yards per catch this past season for Columbia. So definitely more of a vertical guy, 43 catches, 760 yards, 9 touchdowns. That instantly becomes the most production that KU has at the wide receiver position because they went out and they got a couple guys with some high upside, like Emmanuel Henderson, right, who's got potential for a real high upside. Levi Wentz had a solid year at Albany as well, so he's a guy that comes in with a decent floor production. But yeah, this is a room where you knew putting the pieces together was going to be a bit of a challenge, right? And I think KU really navigated it pretty well. You talked about sort of diversifying strengths, it seems like, with different guys they got in terms of what guys can do well and what guys can't do well. But then beyond that, you did manage to get a couple guys that you feel like are going to be you anticipate hopefully will be relatively high floor type guys like a Canty, like a Levi Wentz, while also you get guys that I think have a significantly higher ceiling, but maybe there's a bit more of a gamble there with like an Emmanuel Henderson or even like a Cam Pickett from Ball State as well. So you mentioned KU not necessarily having a true number one. I mean, does that concern you at all? Like if Emmanuel Henderson is not stepping in and being sort of that type of player right away, is that alarming at all that KU may not have somebody that you feel like can be the number one guy early in the season in 2025?
I think you can succeed without a true number one. I think, you and I have made the comparison this year to 2022, right? Where Kansas wound up going 6-6 and reaching the bowl game. That was kind of the year where you saw Luke Graham and LJ Arnold and Quentin Skinner. They all kind of emerged at the same time, right? There wasn't a number one receiver out of that bunch, and I don't think that it hurt that team for those guys to be that way. I do think there's a major advantage to having a number one wide receiver in that if you've got a no doubt number one, the way that he can bend coverages, the way that he can command defensive attention, it makes everybody else play up and gives opportunities to other guys, even beyond just saying, hey, this guy's really good. Jalen's going to feel really good throwing the ball to him. And so I like your point on Canty. You're talking about a two-time first-team All-IB player. I think Canty is maybe the closest thing in that group to just plug-and-play starter. Like, hey, you arrive, you've got a spot, come in. And to be fair, they are going to have all these guys have to put in the work and work their way in. I think Lance Leipold has done an amazing job with that in the past where guys aren't handed anything. You even think about like a Mike Nowitzki that all of us knew the second he arrived, hey, this guy is going to be the starting center. I think he started off on the third team, Nick. And they basically said, hey, yes, you started for us at Buffalo. Yes, we know you, more than we even know these Kansas guys. You're going to have to prove it and earn it once you get here. Even saying that, I do think that Canty's skill set, along with the production he already has, I think in that group, he's maybe the closest thing to just saying right off the bat, like, hey, this guy should be ready to go. And whether he's, I think he'll probably start, but whether he starts or not, he's going to be in that rotation.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to talk a little bit more about the transfer portal class KU has. Mentioned they might try to add some more guys, maybe touch on that as well coming up on the other side. Of course, we got to tell you about home field apparel. I mentioned, listen, it's going to be Snowmageddon. It's going to be a blizzard. And if you're like me, I'm going to be putting on my home field apparel to stay warm. I got my home field apparel joggers, long sleeve shirt. You can get hats as well over there, jackets from KU and 140 other plus schools. So if you already have one, bundle up. If you don't, I don't think you're going to be able to get one in time for the winter storm, but for the next one, I guess maybe you could with tons of different designs, retro logos, all that good stuff at homefieldapparel.com. And you can use the promo code PAYHEAT24, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. You can stay warm and fuzzy and cozy in your home field apparel gear like I am this weekend and really throughout the rest of this winter season as well if there's more at winter storm. So once again, that's PayHeat24 for 15% off your first order, and more transfer portal talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Don't forget, if you are listening on your audio platform, you can subscribe. You can drop a 5-star rating and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe there. We're getting closer to 500 subscribers on our YouTube channel, so thank you everyone that has subscribed, and you can subscribe as well. Drop a comment. People were commenting, of course, about KU basketball after their loss against West Virginia. We might touch on that a little bit coming up later on the show as they head to UCF later this weekend. But I do want to continue this conversation with you, Kevin, about the transfer portal. And yeah, you were talking about there at the end about nothing is earned, right? Nothing is given. Everything is earned. Got that backwards. Nothing is given. Everything's earned for this KU staff. And I think we talked about it throughout the season with kind of how things unfolded this season for KU. Really rough start, right? And Lance Leipold week in and week out said, hey, the locker room's not lost. And then KU puts things together, gets some really big wins down the stretch to end the season. Kind of finished with a dud, though, against Baylor. But overall, you felt good about the way they finished it. And I just wonder if you're a player looking at this program and seeing like, hey, these guys went through some adversity and the locker room stayed together, right? Like, that becomes a culture thing, right? Where you can talk to recruits and say, hey, look, you come in here, you become part of this culture of we're really going to build this thing. And I think that's still a really strong selling point for KU. Obviously, you think about, there's probably no bigger selling point than the new stadium, I would think, right? That's going to be pretty sick. You've got new facilities, all that good stuff. So I don't know. It feels like KU has turned a corner, right? Obviously the record didn't go the way KU hoped it would, but it feels like they turned a corner in terms of Lance Leipold establishing that culture and continuing it. And now they've got some extra support as well from the facility side and so on and so forth that they can go out and try to get players that want to step in and have an impact for KU.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, you're one part of the Verbal Commitment podcast that also appears on this KU channel, and on there we hear it from recruits, right? We hear them say, "Hey, they weren't far off this year. They dropped a couple games, but at the same time, they were games that they were in. They didn't lose a lot. They played really well at the end, and so it's something that I think Lincoln Cure talked about it on the show. I think JJ Dunnigan talked about it, who recently committed. We just had Hunter Higgins on the show, and he talked about hey, KU's building something there, and there's still that positive momentum, right? And it sounds weird to say after a 5-7 season that didn't match up with maybe a lot of people's expectations, but I think they've done a really nice job in the way that they packaged that to guys coming into the program. And I think if you talk to these guys in the transfer portal, that's probably something too. It's not just opportunity. It's opportunity at a place where, there's something building here. And a lot of these guys, Nick, are multi-year guys and guys that are going to stick around, not just for this year, but for the future. But I do think that, to your point, I do think the culture is showing up as a positive on the recruiting trail, and certainly I would agree in the transfer portal as well.
Well, and that's where you mentioned the other key. We've talked about this previously, but getting guys that do have multiple years left, right? Yeah. Obviously, I think it's easy to really just focus on 2025 and sort of reloading and try to go all in for 2025, especially with knowing that Jalen Daniels is back for what will certainly be his last year now.
Yeah,
in 2025. So you'd love to sort of reload for that specifically, but also looking at the big picture, right? I love what you mentioned about Tyler Mercer, right? A guy that started at North Texas. There's a decent chance he might not start this year, but he's somebody that has multiple years left that could be a really, really quality piece for KU down the road. Emmanuel Henderson's got multiple years left. Julia Hurley's got multiple years left. Some of those types of guys as well that could make an impact in 2025, but maybe could make a bigger impact even further down the line as well. Okay, let's shift to what KU might still be working on here, Kevin. I mentioned they've got 18 commits, which, by the way, those 18 commits for Kansas, that's ranked 20th in the transfer portal. Earlier on, KU was getting a lot of commits really in quick succession, and that really boosted their ranking in the transfer portal rankings in 24/7, which was nice. They now settled in at 20, which is still a really good spot, I think, to be in for KU with those 18 commits. They were in the top 10 at one point, but they dropped a little bit. You look at Texas Tech. I know you love what they've done. They're still number 2 in the rankings. LSU's number 1, actually, interestingly enough. In terms of other Big 12 teams, though, after Texas Tech, I believe Kansas is the next highest ranked. Oh, wait, we got Colorado here at 17, and then Kansas and Arizona right there as well. So I like what Kansas has done, obviously, and they still have a little bit of work to do, like I mentioned. A couple of positions where it seems like they may still be looking to add a guy. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the wide receiver position, Kevin, and it sounds like KU may still be trying to add one more, potentially. A name to keep an eye on is somebody who has a Kansas connection. That is Cortez Bram, a transfer from Nevada, who played under Matt Lubick, who was the offensive coordinator for Nevada last year, now coming to be the offensive coordinator of Kansas. So there's that connection as well.
He also played at Hutch Community College. So, yeah.
As well. Listen, the Blue Dragons, those guys turn out high-level talent. So if you played community college there's there's a chance you're probably a really strong player. So he could be a name to keep an eye on. I think by far the biggest fish in the pond, so to speak, that KU is still interested in or seems to be going after is Trey Lathan, linebacker out of Virginia. We're talking linebacker spot. Kansas has two, I think, pretty quality linebackers already in the fold with Joseph Sipp and Bengali Kamara. But, man, would love to add a third one. Lathan is a very much proven power 4 level player at the linebacker position. He's a guy that KU seems pretty interested in. And that, I think that could be really a home run for KU at the linebacker spot if they're able to get him on as well.
Yeah, he would be a terrific pickup. A guy too that has overcome adversity in his career. Had the really bad injury, I believe, in 2023. And came back from it this year, which is saying something because I think Nick didn't he finish 79 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, something like that.
Yeah, I got a strong year statistically,
which is really good, and even better when you consider when you look at interviews with him after the first couple of weeks. He's like, yeah, I'm kind of playing my way in still, getting used to being back on the field. And so giving him a year, he's a really instinctual guy. You watch him play. He's somebody that makes plays in the backfield and does a really nice job shooting through. And Nick, I really feel like the biggest strength of this KU defense is going to be the defensive tackle position. Not only because they bring guys back, but also they bring a guy back through the transfer portal in Gage Keys, who plugs into that rotation really nicely. But my point just being, I think a guy like Trey Lathan plays up, right? Because if you're playing really well up front at those defensive tackle positions and you're eating up blocks and you're penetrating, a guy like Trey Lathan has a chance to be really, really good with that combination of guys. And if you were able to add him to Bengali Kamara and to Joseph Sipp, you would have to love the talent of that linebacker group even before you start talking about the guys that you already have in the program that you're hoping would take a step forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned that D-tackle room as being one of the big strengths, and I would tend to agree with you for sure. And as an extension of that, right, defensive end position, pass rush, it's always the most premium position probably outside of quarterback, it seems like, in today's football. And Kansas last year, I don't know, Kevin, do you think it's fair to use the term they rolled the dice with Dean Miller last year as a pass rusher, in the sense of they weren't really sure what they had, but he was kind of all they got, so they threw it out there, and he ended up, being okay and did make some nice plays.
Second team All Big 12, Nick.
Yeah, no, that is true.
No.
I'm not trying to downplay it.
No, I get it. I 100% get it, because the pass rush was not as consistent rushing for it as what they would have wanted. And I think about halfway through the season, they made a conscious decision that they were going to start sending more guys because that was what they had to do. And so from one respect, Dean Miller, I would say even exceeded expectations. I think, Nick, to your point about, kind of rolling the dice in terms of this is a guy that's been in your program but hadn't really played a major role up to that point. And obviously we talked a lot in the preseason. He credited Katie O'Connor. He had struggled to put on weight, to keep weight, and the nutrition's work in doing that. But I thought Dean Miller had a really good year. But at the same time, to your point, you have to get better pass rush out of those 4 guys. And you have to put your defense in a position where if it's 3rd and 8, you don't have to send other guys to get to the quarterback. Because we talked about this through the season, Nick. One of the things that really wound up hurting them at times, it wasn't just that they weren't getting to the quarterback with 4. It's that when they rushed 4, scrambling quarterbacks were really making them pay too, because guys weren't getting home. The defense was in coverage for a long time. And then the quarterback would also have a time to exploit a running lane if one developed. And so I do think adding guys at defensive end, to your point, they already have Caleb Redd coming in from Kentucky. But I think they really want to shore up that strong side defensive end spot where you look at where Jeremy Robinson was this past year. And I think they've got some intriguing guys potentially at that spot coming in to visit, Nick, and guys that could wind up being depending on what happens with other guys that you already have on the roster, you might wind up getting your strong side defensive end starter out of the portal.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the list of positional needs maybe that KU still has, I think with Trey Lathan from West Virginia, like that becomes number one, linebacker, number one. But then I think defensive end is pretty high on that list as well of possible extra guys they may want to add. If they want to make room for another receiver, they might do that also. Those maybe are sort of still the top three spots where it's a situation where you feel like you're pretty good in what you have, but you have a chance to really set yourself up to be in a very good position by adding, that one extra guy. I think that's how I feel about the linebacker spot and probably the defensive end spot for that matter as well. And then you look at wide receiver and adding one more guy could be nice also potentially. But yeah, overall, I mean, I think we talked about this previously, but this transfer portal cycle, I think, has probably gone about as well as you could ask for if you're Kansas in terms of checking off your needs. Now it is just going to be a matter of getting a lot of these guys on campus for spring football and getting them acclimated and hopefully having, those guys be able to step into those roles coming up next fall. And then, what's sort of gotten lost in the shuffle of all this, Kevin, is that Kansas is going to have two new coordinators. I say new, with Jim Zabrowski, who obviously did call plays for KU in the bowl game and against UNLV, but they're going to have two new coordinators, which means that you're maybe looking at some different schemes, maybe looking at some different, roles or opportunities for guys compared to what we've seen from KU previously under Brian Borland and then under Andy Kolnicki / Jeff Grimes. So that's something else to keep in mind is, there may be some different scheme fits that KU might be looking at if they are planning on making any adjustments on either side of the ball with how they want to operate. So, and then obviously on the defensive side with DK McDonald, we're kind of in the dark really on what to totally expect from KU's defense. So that makes me even more excited for spring ball to get a chance to possibly get out and maybe talk to some of the coaches about what they're planning to do in the fall of 2025 as well. By the way, should be worth mentioning, Andy Kolnicki is 2 wins away from a national championship with Penn State. So they have seemed to figure some things out. I question here's I have a question for you, Kevin.
All right, here we go.
Is the aura of Andy Kolnicki enough to overcome James Franklin choking in every big game?
That's a tough one. The funny thing about it is if you've watched Penn State this year and watched some of their nationally televised games, people are getting after Andy Kotelnicki for situational play calling, and it's kind of funny because obviously that was something KU fans had an issue with Andy Kotelnicki, and I think kind of tended to forget that they had that issue. After he left, it was something that KU fans certainly got after Jeff Grimes for this year, and it speaks to that kind of college football truism that at any given time, 90% of college football fans are unhappy with their offensive coordinator to some extent. But I do think Penn State feels like it's built to win in the playoff, just in that they've got a physical running game. They're a little more creative with it because Kotelnicki's there than maybe they have been. They're really good defensively, got a lot of great athletes on that side. I don't know that they get across the finish line, but I do think that Andy Kotelnicki stepped into a good situation there, and obviously he's helped Penn State, I think, get to this point. Interestingly enough, too, Nick, like I'm sure you've seen the Drew Aller has already talked about how he's coming back next year. I'm interested to see what that looks like because obviously Drew Aller is a different kind of guy than the guys that Andy Kotelnicki has had success with in the past. The guy who wound up going to Missouri that KU fans are probably going to see next year when Kansas goes to Columbia, Bo Prabula, he was more the type of guy that I think Kotelnicki would have really thrived with, more of a running threat, and they kind of had that package in there for him to do that stuff. But that's a really long-winded way to say I don't think they win the national title. I don't know that it's going to be because, Franklin chokes off, though. I think that it just may be, hey, there's 4 really good teams left.
At this point, I think the funniest possible outcome would be Ohio State win the national championship after literally people wanting Ryan Day fired after they lost to Michigan. I think
Yeah.
that'd be the funniest possible outcome. I mean, they certainly look like they could do it.
They look amazing right now, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because if you talk to an Ohio State fan, Nick, they're almost like mad that they look this good right now. Because
Yeah. I think that's why it'd be hilarious.
it's actually kind of similar to when KU was pulling off the 3-game winning streak over ranked teams. Like, I feel like a lot of the people watching our show were like, well, yeah, but where was this earlier in the year? And that's 100% what Ryan Day was. Yeah, like even as they were absolutely paddling Oregon, there were still people on Twitter like, yeah, but did you see his play calling against Michigan though? And it's like okay, like I get it. You don't want to lose to Michigan. You're also, absolutely destroying the number one team in the country right now. Like, maybe he gets a pass for a little bit and we wait and see how this thing goes.
Well, it's a real test of just how big of a rivalry that is. Like, if you went to Ohio State fans like before the season, you were like, hey, you're going to lose to Michigan, but you will possibly be in the national title game. Or like, let's just say hypothetically, like, you'll lose to Michigan, but you'll make the national title game. Would you accept that, like, with the chance to win the national title? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It'd be an interesting question to pose.
It's fair because that same question, people used to ask that about the 2007 Orange Bowl team. Like, basically, would you have rather won the Orange Bowl or would you have rather beaten Missouri? And it's a little bit of a trick question because if you beat Missouri, you're 12-0 at that point. Like, you've got a chance to get into the national title game, but
you'd have to go play Oklahoma. So
yeah, and so I get. I do think that that's sort of a fascinating question. Obviously, I feel like you'd rather have a national title than beat.
I mean, you would think, but dude, they cross out the M in everything they do. I mean, I don't think we're talking about logical, sane people here.
They don't even use the names of the school. It's a team up north or whatever when they're talking about each other. So
like the KU Missouri rivalry is deeply rooted in real life, like actual war,
yeah,
like literal war. If you, but yeah, I mean, even still, that Ohio State Michigan rivalry is one of the fiercest, I think, in the country. So it is fascinating, but yeah, college football playoff is down to 4 teams. We'll see what happens in that as well. That was our, I guess, college football playoff segment, if you want to call it that. Kevin, you want to add anything else about KU's transfer portal here, and then we might talk a little bit of KU basketball before we get out of here.
Yeah, no, Lathan to me is such a fascinating guy because I think if you get Lathan, and I don't want to put this much on like, hey, you got to get this one guy, but if you get him, knowing what your needs were heading into the transfer portal, if you get Lathan, add a strong side defensive end, whether that's the kid from Colorado State, whether that's Gabe Kershke or Diamante Diggs, or whether it's somebody in the spring, I think you give this portal class like an A-. And to your point about Kamara and Sip, I think that you almost come out of it feeling like as well as you did at the wide receiver position, linebacker might have been the strongest class if you wind up getting Lathan to go with Kamara and Sip, in terms of, hey, we've got a big need here, and you absolutely filled it with some dudes. And so I do think that as we progress over the next week or however long it winds up taking, I think Lathan is a really interesting one to watch just because if you wind up getting Trey Lathan, you have landed 3 absolute dudes in the portal at linebacker.
The kicker erasure from Kevin was probably Lathan margin could end up being that the kicker position may end up being the best position that you improve in the most in 2025.
If Kansas winds up beating K-State this year without a special teams gap and with Lathan margin kicking, just the most gorgeous 45-yard field goal right down the middle, no stress, whatever, then I will come on the show and we'll have to figure out like some penance for me to pay or something. As long as it's not like eating mayo or something, because I can't.
You don't like mayo?
I am not a mayo guy at all.
Well, thank God you're not a coach in the Duke's Mayo Bowl then.
Yeah, I would absolutely, be like armored up on my face to make sure that I was, maybe I'd have them take like athletic tape and like tape it over my mouth before they dumped it on. So
Yeah, listen, I only half joke about the kicker position, but legitimately, if Leith Martin ends up being like like he did this past year I said he was from FAU. I need to correct myself. Not FAU, South Alabama. They're like the same.
Jerseys look so similar. Like
FAU, South Alabama, tomato, same thing, right? I mean, hopefully there's no FAU or South Alabama fans that listen to the show. But they said
get in line behind the Iowa State and Colorado fans that already don't like Nick for more legitimate reasons.
Yeah, take a ticket behind the Iowa State fans, the K-State fans, the Colorado fans, the West Virginia fans. Take a ticket, and your time will come. FAU fans, your time will come, but that time is not today. Speaking of the great state of Florida, Kevin.
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
Look at that transition.
I'm going to say luckily/unluckily, Kansas basketball is going to be playing on Sunday at UCF. The reason I say luckily is because they're going to be avoiding this winter storm that we're dealing with over the weekend here. Unluckily, because the last time they went there last year, they lost. And you've already started 0-1 with the loss against West Virginia. Give me just like a shotgun 3-minute version of maybe what you hope KU will do against UCF to try to get back in the win column.
Well, shoot, I can do a 5-second version, right? It's start faster. I get that sounds simple, but I mean, the thing is, in 2 of KU's 3 losses this year, Kansas has just been dead at the very start of the game, right? The Missouri game, and then you look at the West Virginia loss, and both of those games, I feel like, Nick, would have been wins if you just didn't start the way that they started. And so I think getting off to a good start is a huge part of it. I'd like to see more aggressiveness out of AJ Storr. There were opportunities, I think, even with him not playing as much, for him to impact the game when he's getting the ball in the spots that he's getting the ball, where if he's head up, ready to drive, when he catches that ball, that he can make an impact and he can help him. I did think one of the few positives, Nick, from that West Virginia game was Kansas started attacking the basket in the second half and started getting to the free throw line. And we've talked about the lack of spacing, et cetera. The thing is, Nick, you can get away with a lack of spacing if you get to the free throw line and turn up points that way. You can get away with a lack of free throws and things like that if you shoot from deep. You can't just not have both. That's when the offense really struggles, is when you're not attacking the rim and you're not shooting the ball well from distance and spacing things out. And so I think offensively you'd like to continue to see that aggressiveness carry over. I will say, Nick, I do think this is a little bit of a tricky spot. UCF 10-2, a lot of people will look at, the schedule and say, hey, they've lost to, 2 of the better teams that they played. But the 2 best teams they played, according to KenPom, and I don't know what Nick Palm says, but KenPom says it's Texas A&M and Texas Tech. And UCF won both of those games. Won in Lubbock, did beat Texas A&M at UCF. And so this is a team that you can't not show up for this game. You can't go in thinking, oh, well, this is a break before the schedule gets tougher. No, this is absolutely a losable game. And quite frankly, Nick, you don't have to play badly to lose this game. If you're playing a middle of the road game, you could lose this game. And so I think that's what I really want to see, is Kansas coming out and starting better, being sharp throughout, and just generally speaking, looking more like the team that came out against Duke early versus the team that came out against Missouri and West Virginia early. How about you? What do you see as kind of the keys to this one?
Yeah, I mean, to your point there at the end about you could lose this game, that's what concerns me the most, because KU, they're going to get UCF on Sunday. Then they come home and play Arizona State, for a midweek game. Arizona State is one of the lower ranked teams in the conference. You figure you can win that game at home. I mean, I don't know now. You lost to West Virginia at home. But then here's the issue, Kevin. Then you go back-to-back games on the road at Cincinnati and Iowa State. So if you lose this game against UCF, you could legitimately be staring down the barrel of a 1-4 start to conference play. Like, I don't think that's that outrageous to consider. If they lose this one, you beat Arizona State, you lose Cincinnati and Iowa State, and then you play K-State at home is your next game. So you could like, it is not that hard. You don't have to have a very great imagination to envision KU starting 1-4 with K-State coming out on Fieldhouse. So that is my concern. I mean, we talked about it before. You're going to be playing two really high quality teams per week, pretty much every week. And so, you can afford to have a bad week in November where you lose to Missouri and lose to Creighton, and it's fine. But you can't really have a bad week in January or in February because you're in conference play, and it's just it's going to be very difficult to recover from. So, yeah, to your point about UCF beating Texas Tech, Nick Palm marks that as a huge win.
You love Lubbock and win. Actually, like Texas Tech has generally speaking been superhuman in Lubbock and beatable on the road. But so yeah, to go in there and win there, one of if not the most hostile atmosphere in the Big 12, it's certainly in the top 2 or 3. I mean, Kansas has a great atmosphere. Obviously Allen Fieldhouse is terrific. Texas Tech, you fear for your life. Like when you go down there and play, like from a hostility standpoint, it's up near the top. So for you, I think to go there and come out with a win, that says something to me.
100%. Nick Palm says that's a huge win for UCF. But yeah, I mean, listen, Allen Fieldhouse obviously has a great atmosphere, and what makes the Allen Fieldhouse atmosphere great is it's the mecca of college basketball. It's so on and so forth. There's all the history there. But you look at a place like Lubbock, and I will toss Iowa State fans a bone here. When you look at a place like Lubbock or the Hilton in Ames for Iowa State, those are two places that it's not necessarily like the aura of, this is a very historical basketball site. Like this is a place with rich history. It's more just their fans are just literally filled with vitriol at you. They literally just hate you. They literally just want you to not exist anymore. So that is what makes those environments tough. So they're tough, yes, compared to Allen Fieldhouse, but in a different way, in a literal, like, we hope your bus crashes on the way back to your destination type of way. But yeah, yes. And listen, Kansas is going to get UCF's best shot. Yep. Listen, when they played last year, that was the first time UCF had sold out their arena ever in the history of their arena. Okay, that's the Kansas effect. As well. So you're going to get UCF's best shot. They're probably going to have it sold out again for you coming in again. And look, Kansas, if you're another team in the Big 12, Kansas looks really beatable right now. Certainly. After the loss to West Virginia at home, they look very vulnerable. So that's probably going to add to it as well. Yeah, I think the first to kind of put a bow in all of this, what you said at the very beginning is the same thing that I'm looking for, which is I think you'll be able to tell a lot about where things are going within the first 5-ish minutes of the game for KU. If they're able to get off to a relatively steady start, and I'm not even saying like they have to get off and get out, up 6-8 points early, just get off to like a stable start, like not down 10. I think that'll be a really good sign. But if they're slow out the gate again, that is going to that's going to raise some alarm bells for me, I think, if that ends up being the case. So that's the same thing that I'm looking for as well. We'll be back to talk about that probably later on in the weekend or early next week, because that game being on Sunday afternoon. So be on the lookout on your feeds probably on Monday for us to recap that game for KU. And then again, they go right back into it with Arizona State coming up on Wednesday next week as well, before that 2 games the week after that I mentioned, which is at Cincinnati and at Iowa State. So certainly trying times for Kansas basketball. Got to get back on the right track right away. So we'll also be talking any more updates in the transfer portal for Kansas football as well in the coming weeks, days, so on and so forth also. So you definitely want to stay tuned to your feed on the audio side on Apple, Spotify, or if you're on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, you can subscribe there and stay tuned for our shows there as well. We're pretty close to 500 subscribers, so go ahead and subscribe and help us get there and keep us growing here on KCSN. So, Kevin, you got anything else you want to share with the good listeners?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it.
All right, well, there you go. Once again, stay safe this weekend if you're in the Kansas City area with the winter storm and so on and so forth. And as always, we'll talk to you again very soon. For Kevin Flaherty, he's Nick. I'm Nick Springer. He's Nick Springer. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you.
We're all Nick Springer.
It's just my world. You're living in it. Okay. We should actually wrap it up now. Okay. See ya.